The morning started like any other at our dental clinic in suburban Denver, with the usual hum of equipment and the soft classical music playing in the reception area. I had been working as a pediatric dentist for 12 years, and I thought I had seen everything. But that Tuesday in March would change not just my perspective on my profession, but would set in motion events that would transform multiple lives forever. Emma was 8 years old, with sandy brown hair pulled into pigtails and eyes that seemed older than they should be. Her mother had scheduled her for cavity fillings, and as I prepared the laughing gas to help her relax, she seemed unusually still for a child her age. Most kids fidget or ask endless questions, but Emma sat perfectly motionless, her small hands folded in her lap like she was practicing for something. As the sedation began to take effect and her body finally relaxed into the chair, she looked up at me with slightly unfocused eyes and asked a question that made my heart skip a beat. "Do grown-ups at your house play the statue game too?" The words were slurred from the gas, but there was something in the way she said it that made me pause. My dental hygienist, Nicole, who had been working with me for 5 years and had become like a sister to me, caught my eye. We had developed an almost telepathic communication over the years, and I could see she had heard the same unsettling undertone that I had. I kept my voice light and friendly as I adjusted Emma's position in the chair. "I haven't heard of that game before, sweetie." "What's it like?" Emma's eyes drifted closed for a moment before opening again, and when she spoke, her voice had that dreamy quality that comes with mild sedation. "It's when we hear Daddy's car pull into the driveway. Mommy says statue time, and we all have to freeze exactly where we are. No moving, no talking, no breathing loud, just like statues in the park." Nicole's hand stilled on the instrument tray, and I saw her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. She had 3 kids of her own at home, and I knew she was processing this information through a mother's lens. I continued preparing for the procedure, keeping my movements calm and routine, while my mind raced. "That sounds like an interesting game," Nicole said, her voice perfectly calibrated to encourage without alarming. "How long do you have to stay frozen?" Emma's face lit up with something that looked disturbingly like pride. "I'm really good at it. Last week, I held my spoon in the air for 20 whole minutes without moving. My arm hurt so bad, but I didn't put it down. Mommy said I was the best statue she'd ever seen. Daddy walked right past me and didn't say anything, so I knew I won. 20 minutes. The number echoed in my head as I gently asked Emma to open her mouth so I could begin the procedure. As she lifted her arms to adjust her position, her sleeve rode up, and that's when I saw them. Faint, yellowish marks on her upper arm, the distinctive pattern that anyone in the medical field would recognize. Bruises in various stages of healing, and unmistakably in the shape of adult fingers. My hands remained steady as I worked, years of training keeping me professional even as my stomach churned. "Can you raise your arm a little higher, sweetie? I need to adjust the chair for you." As she complied, lifting both arms, her shirt rode up slightly at the waist. The glimpse I caught made me have to consciously control my breathing. Linear marks crossed her lower back, some clearly old and scarred, others fresher, angrier. I had been trained for this. We all were. Mandatory reporter training was part of maintaining our licenses, but sitting in a conference room looking at slides was vastly different from having a small, trusting child in your chair, casually describing what sounded like systematic abuse, as if it were a normal family game. I continued the procedure, my hands steady even as my mind cataloged every detail, every word, every mark I could see without being obvious about my examination. Nicole, bless her, kept Emma engaged in conversation, her voice warm and interested. "What happens if someone moves during statue time?" she asked, organizing instruments with practiced efficiency while actually documenting everything she could see from her angle. Her phone, I noticed. Another Hadersnassor had disappeared into her pocket, and I suspected she had started a voice recording. We would deal with any legal implications of that later. Right now, evidence was crucial. Emma's expression clouded, and for the first time since she'd been in my chair, I saw fear flicker across her features. That's losing. Daddy doesn't like when we lose. He gets really mad. His face turns all red and he yells so loud the windows shake. Sometimes. She trailed off, seeming to realize even through the sedation that she might be saying too much. I kept my voice casual, professional, just a dentist making conversation with a young patient. "It's okay, sweetie. You're safe here. What were you going to say?" I positioned my light to better illuminate her mouth, but also to get a clearer view of what looked like a healing split in her lip that hadn't been there according to her last visit records from 6 months ago. Sometimes we don't get dinner if we lose, but it's okay because if we're really good and nobody moves, Daddy just walks through the house and goes to his room. Then we can breathe normal again and eat dinner. And sometimes if we're extra good, he even says good job before he goes upstairs. The casual way she described being denied food as punishment made my chest tight. I had to excuse myself, ostensibly to get a different tool from the supply room. In reality, I needed 30 seconds to compose myself and pull up our clinic's mandatory reporting protocols on my computer. My hands shook as I typed, but I forced myself to be methodical. Document everything. Follow procedure. Save this child. When I returned, Nicole had kept the conversation going, her professionalism intact even as I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Emma, what other games does your family play?" I asked, returning to my work while mentally measuring the bruise patterns I could see. The spread was approximately 3.2 centimeters, consistent with an adult male grip. Emma brightened again, that disturbing eagerness to share returning. "Oh, we play lots of games. There's the listening game where Daddy asks us questions and we have to answer exactly right. Like, who's the most important person in this house? The answer is always Daddy. Or, what happens to children who don't respect their father? We have to say they learn their lesson." I carefully examined her teeth, noting what my trained eye recognized as patterns consistent with chronic teeth grinding, likely from stress. The enamel wear was pronounced for a child her age. What happens when someone gets the answer wrong in the listening game? I kept my tone light, just making conversation while I worked. Emma's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Sometimes no breakfast or no lunch. My tummy hurts so bad when that happens, but crying makes it worse because then you're being a baby and babies don't deserve food either. My brother Ethan, he's only 6. He's still learning the rules. Last week he cried during the quiet room game and had to stay in for extra time. I set down my instruments carefully, using the motion to cover my need to steady myself. "Tell me about the quiet room game while I set up this x-ray." I positioned the lead apron over her small body, noting how she winced when I touched her shoulders despite my gentle handling. "It's the closet under the stairs. There's no light in there, and it's really small. When we're bad or if we lose too many games, we have to go in the quiet room until we're sorry enough. I count to keep track of how long I'm in there. My record is 10,000. That's really high, right?" The pride in her voice as she shared this achievement shattered something inside me. 10,000 seconds. I did the math quickly in my head. Over 2.5 hours. A child locked in a dark closet, counting to 10,000 to pass the time. My throat felt thick as I took the necessary x-rays, each movement automatic while my mind reeled. Nicole returned from checking the waiting room, and I saw the way her face had paled. She leaned close and whispered that Emma's father was asking how much longer we would be, that he seemed agitated. My body instinctively positioned itself between Emma and the doorway as I continued working. "Mommy went in the quiet room last week." Emma continued, oblivious to the tension in the room. "She had to fold up real small because she's bigger than us. Daddy said she forgot who pays the bills and who makes the rules. I heard her crying in there, but I couldn't help, or I'd have to go in too. We learned that rule the hard way. The image of a grown woman folded into a small closet, crying while her children listened helplessly, made bile rise in my throat. I had to finish this procedure, had to maintain normalcy while gathering as much information as possible. In between preparations, I casually examined her neck, finding more bruises hidden beneath her hair, older ones that had faded to green and yellow. "Has anyone else ever seen you play these games?" I asked, already knowing what the answer would be. The isolation of abuse victims was textbook, and this father had clearly perfected his control. Emma giggled, a sound that should have been innocent, but given the context was heartbreaking. "No, silly. It's a family secret. Daddy says other people wouldn't understand our special rules. They might think we're weird or try to stop us from being a family. We can't tell teachers or neighbors or anyone. Ethan is getting really good at keeping secrets, too." Last month, Mrs. Patterson next door asked about the yelling she heard, and Ethan told her we were just playing a loud game. Daddy was so proud. The mention of her brother made my urgency even more acute. There were 2 children in this house of horrors, both learning that abuse was just another game to play, another set of rules to follow. I heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy and impatient. A moment later, a man appeared in the doorway. He was exactly what I had pictured, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that filled a room and made it hard to breathe. "How much longer is this going to take?" His voice was controlled, but with an undercurrent that made the hair on my arms stand up. "I've got places to be." I kept my body positioned protectively as I responded calmly. "Just finishing up, Mr. Morrison. Maybe another 10 minutes. We want to make sure Emma's comfort is our priority." He grunted, his eyes scanning the room before landing on Emma, who had gone completely rigid in the chair. The transformation was instantaneous. The chatty, relaxed child became a statue, just as she had described. Her breathing became so shallow it was barely visible. Her hands frozen mid-gesture, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond her father's shoulder. I kept working, pretending not to notice her sudden stillness, while internally documenting this real-time demonstration of the fear he instilled. He watched for another moment before turning and leaving, his footsteps heavy down the hall. Only when we could no longer hear him did Emma slowly begin to relax, her body unfreezing incrementally like she was testing whether it was safe. I almost moved when he came in. She whispered, and there was real terror in her voice. "I almost lost the game." That would have been bad, really, really bad. I finished the procedure as quickly as I safely could while Nicole quietly slipped out. I knew she was alerting our office manager about the situation and possibly calling the authorities from a private location. We had protocols for this, but knowing what to do and actually doing it while a child sat vulnerable in your chair were 2 very different things. "You did amazing today, Emma," I said as I removed her bib and helped her sit up. "The very best patient I've had all week. Better than being a statue, so much better." The words felt inadequate for what I wanted to convey, but they were all I could safely say. I walked Emma back to the waiting room where her father sat scrolling through his phone, his jaw tight with impatience. She went to him immediately but carefully, I noticed. No running, no exuberance, just measured steps and a cautious settling into the chair beside him. He didn't acknowledge her, just stood and headed for the reception desk to handle payment. That's when I saw our office manager, Patricia, work her magic. There seemed to be an issue with their insurance that would take a few minutes to resolve. Papers that needed signatures, calls that needed to be made. Mr. Morrison's frustration was palpable, but Patricia remained professionally apologetic and efficiently incompetent, buying precious time. I retreated to my office where Nicole was already on the phone with Child Protective Services. She had our documentation pulled up on the computer, photos she had discreetly taken of visible injuries, timestamps of concerning statements. We had been trained for this, but the reality was so much more intense than any training scenario. Within 15 minutes, 2 police officers arrived through our back entrance, followed closely by a CPS worker. I briefed them quickly, showing the photographic evidence, sharing Emma's statements about the games, the quiet room, the systematic withholding of food. The female officer's face was stone as she looked at the photos of Emma's bruises, but I saw her hands clench. The CPS worker, a woman named Sarah Chen, who looked both exhausted and determined, took notes as I spoke. She asked specific questions about Emma's demeanor, about exact phrases used, about the brother Emma had mentioned. When I told her about the 10,000 seconds in the closet, she closed her eyes briefly before continuing to write. The plan was simple but required careful coordination. They would approach this as a welfare check based on a concerned report, not immediately revealing the source. Emma and her brother Ethan would be removed from the home pending investigation, and both parents would be interviewed separately. It was textbook, but textbooks didn't capture the weight of knowing you were about to shatter a family's facade and hopefully save 2 children in the process. I watched from my office window as the officers approached Mr. Morrison in the waiting room. His face went from annoyed to furious in seconds, his voice rising as he demanded to know what was happening. Emma, still sitting quietly beside him, became that statue again, not moving, even as her father's anger escalated. It was Patricia who calmly took Emma's hand and led her back to the toy area, speaking softly about needing to show her a new puzzle we had just gotten. The confrontation moved outside as Mr. Morrison refused to cooperate, his voice carrying through the walls. Accusations flew about interference, about his rights as a parent, about lawsuits and consequences, but the officers remained calm and professional, and eventually, he seemed to realize that his intimidation tactics weren't working here. Sarah Chen approached Emma with the kind of gentle patience that spoke of years of experience with traumatized children. She introduced herself simply as someone who helped make sure kids were safe and happy. Emma studied her with those 2 old eyes before asking if this was about the games. The honesty of the question seemed to catch even the experienced social worker off guard. Sarah knelt down to Emma's level and said simply that she was here to help, that Emma had been very brave talking about her family, and that no one was in trouble for telling the truth. "What about the statue game?" Emma asked, and there was real worry in her voice. "If I'm not there, who will help Ethan be a good statue? He's still learning, and if he moves—" She trailed off, the implications clear even unsaid. Sarah's response was gentle but clear. "There won't be any more statue games, sweetie. You and Ethan are going to be safe." The look of confusion on Emma's face was heartbreaking. She literally could not conceptualize a world without the games, without the rules, without the careful navigation of her father's moods. "But didn't you just tell him?" she asked, glancing toward the window where her father was still arguing with police. "He's going to be so mad. The quiet room time is going to be so long." It took another hour to coordinate everything. Ethan was picked up from his elementary school by another CPS worker and a police officer. The principal later told me that the little boy had asked repeatedly if he had lost a game, if that's why he was in trouble. Both children were placed in emergency foster care together, a small mercy in a situation with few bright spots. Mr. Morrison was arrested on charges of resisting arrest and disorderly conduct, charges that would hold him while the investigation into the abuse allegations proceeded. Mrs. Morrison, Rebecca, was brought in for questioning separately. The picture that emerged from her interview is perhaps even more heartbreaking than the children's trauma. She had been as much a victim as a perpetrator, enforcing the rules out of her own fear, participating in the abuse to avoid becoming its sole target. She admitted to putting the children in the closet, to denying them food, to teaching them the games that kept her husband's rage at manageable levels. But she also revealed her own experiences in that closet, her own hungry nights, her own statue-still terror. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emma's proud face as she told me about holding a spoon in the air for 20 minutes. I saw her transformation into a living statue when her father appeared. I heard her worried voice asking who would help her brother now. My partner found me at 3 a.m, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, staring at nothing. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, documentation, and preparation. I gave my formal statement to the detective assigned to the case, a man named David Ruiz, who had the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much, but kept fighting anyway. He told me that the evidence from the home was overwhelming. They had found a notebook where Mr. Morrison had documented punishments like they were scientific experiments, rating the children's compliance, noting which consequences were most effective. The quiet room was exactly as Emma had described, a small closet under the stairs with scratches on the inside of the door that made Detective Ruiz's jaw clench when he showed me the photos. There were fingernail marks at different heights, a heartbreaking timeline of abuse as the children grew. They found the timer Emma had mentioned, the one used to track their punishment time, still sitting on the kitchen counter like any ordinary household item. A week after that initial appointment, Sarah Chen called with an update. Both children were adjusting to their foster home, though the behaviors they exhibited broke my heart all over again. They would freeze randomly throughout the day, holding whatever position they were in when they heard certain triggers like car doors or heavy footsteps. Ethan had been found standing in a corner counting softly to himself, and when asked what he was doing, he explained he was practicing for when he had to go back to the quiet room. The foster mother, an experienced woman named Linda who had been caring for traumatized children for over a decade, reported that both children hoarded food, hiding crackers and fruit in their rooms. They ate quickly and silently, never asking for seconds, even when clearly still hungry. When she told them they could eat whenever they were hungry, Emma had looked at her with deep suspicion and asked what game they had to play first. The legal proceedings moved forward with the grinding slowness of the justice system. Mr. Morrison's lawyer, a man who seemed to specialize in defending the indefensible, tried every tactic to discredit my report. He questioned my qualifications, suggested I had misunderstood innocent family games, implied that I had coached Emma into making false accusations. But the evidence was overwhelming, and my documentation was thorough. Mrs. Morrison was charged as well, though the prosecutor, understanding the complex dynamics of abuse, offered her a plea deal that included counseling and supervised visitation with her children if she testified against her husband. The day she took that deal was the first time I saw her in person since everything had happened. She was smaller than I expected, hollowed out by years of fear, but there was something in her eyes that might have been the beginning of hope. The trial was set for 6 months out, but Mr. Morrison eventually took a plea deal rather than face a jury, 5 years in prison, loss of parental rights, and a restraining order that would last until both children were adults. It felt both like too much and nowhere near enough. How do you quantify the theft of a childhood, the perversion of parental love into a weapon of control? During the sentencing hearing, victim impact statements were read. Rebecca Morrison stood at the podium, her voice shaking but determined, and spoke about watching her children learn to move without sound, to eat without joy, to exist without truly living. She took responsibility for her role while also painting a picture of the escalating control and abuse that had trapped them all. When she spoke about hearing her daughter count to 10,000 in the dark, several people in the gallery wiped away tears. I was asked to testify about the impact of the abuse from a medical perspective. I spoke about the patterns of bruising, the stress responses I had observed, the dental damage from chronic teeth grinding that suggested prolonged anxiety. But what I really wanted to talk about was Emma's pride in being a good statue, the way she worried about her brother, the casual acceptance of hunger as punishment. Those were the details that haunted me. Emma and Ethan began therapy while in foster care, and reports suggested slow but steady progress. They were learning that food was not a reward to be earned, that making noise was acceptable, that adults could be trusted. Linda reported that Emma had recently laughed loud enough to echo through the house, then immediately froze, waiting for punishment. When nothing happened except Linda's smile, Emma had laughed again, softer, but genuine. 3 months after the sentencing, I received a letter forwarded through CPS. It was from Emma, written in careful pencil on lined paper. She thanked me for listening to her about the games and told me she was learning new games now, fun ones where nobody had to be still or quiet. She had drawn a picture at the bottom of herself at a playground, arms spread wide, mouth open in what was clearly a shout of joy. No statue in sight. Rebecca Morrison's journey was its own complex story. With her husband imprisoned, she had to rebuild not just her life, but her entire sense of self. Years of abuse had eroded her ability to make decisions, to trust her judgment, to exist without the framework of rules and punishments he had created. Her court-mandated therapy was intensive, focusing not just on her role as a perpetrator, but on her own victimization. She lived in a women's shelter at first, learning basic life skills that her husband had systematically denied her: how to open a bank account, how to apply for jobs, how to make choices without seeking permission. The other women in the shelter recognized her type immediately. The woman who had survived by becoming complicit, who had protected herself by enforcing the very rules that trapped her. Finding work was almost impossible. Years out of the workforce with a criminal record made her virtually unemployable. But eventually, a grocery store manager named Marcus took a chance on her for overnight stocking. The work was physical and solitary, perfect for someone learning to exist in the world again. She told me later that those quiet hours arranging products on shelves felt like meditation, each can and box placed deliberately by her own choice. The supervised visits with her children began 4 months after the arrest. The first one was devastating. Ethan wouldn't look at her, wouldn't speak, sat as far away as the small room allowed. Emma asked painful questions with the directness only children possess. Why did you put us in the quiet room? Why didn't you give us food? Why didn't you stop, Daddy? Rebecca answered as honestly as she could, acknowledging the harm while trying to explain the inexplicable. Progress was measured in the smallest increments: a word from Ethan during the 3rd visit, Emma accepting a hug during the 5th. By the 10th visit, they were able to play a board game together, and Rebecca had to excuse herself to cry in the bathroom when Ethan laughed at something silly Emma did. It was the first time she'd heard him laugh without fear behind it. The impact on those of us involved in the case was profound and lasting. Nicole, my dental hygienist who had been so instrumental that day, ended up leaving pediatric dentistry. She said she couldn't look at children in her chair without wondering what secrets they were hiding, what games they were being forced to play at home. She moved into dental education, teaching new hygienists not just about teeth, but about recognizing signs of abuse. Our clinic implemented new protocols after Emma's case. We added specific questions to our intake forms, created safe spaces for children to disclose concerns, and held regular training sessions on identifying abuse. Patricia, our office manager, became certified in trauma-informed care and transformed our waiting room into a space that felt safer for vulnerable children. I struggled with hypervigilance for months after the case. Every quiet child made me wonder. Every bruise made me suspicious. Every parent who seemed controlling set off alarm bells. My own therapist helped me find balance between appropriate vigilance and paranoid oversight. She reminded me that while I couldn't save every child, I had saved Emma and Ethan, and that mattered. The ripple effects continued to spread. Other mandated reporters in our area requested training based on our experience. I found myself speaking at conferences, sharing Emma's story with rooms full of teachers, doctors, coaches, and others who worked with children. Each time I told the story of the statue game, I saw recognition dawn on faces in the audience, people realizing that the strange behavior they had dismissed might be something more sinister. A year after that first appointment, I received an update from Linda, the foster mother. Emma and Ethan were thriving in ways that seemed miraculous given their start. Emma had joined the school choir and apparently had no problem being heard. Ethan was playing soccer, running and shouting with abandon. They still had challenges, still had therapy appointments and difficult days, but they were learning to be children. Rebecca's progress was slower but steady. After a year of compliance with all court requirements, she was granted unsupervised visits. The first time she picked up her children without a social worker present, she sat in her car afterward and sobbed for 20 minutes. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming responsibility of being trusted with her children again. She had moved into a small apartment, carefully chosen for its lack of closets that could be used for punishment. Every room had windows that opened wide, and she had painted the walls in bright colors that her husband would have forbidden. Emma and Ethan had their own rooms for weekend visits, decorated exactly as they wanted, with no rules about keeping them perfect. The reconciliation wasn't complete or simple. There were setbacks, difficult conversations, moments when the children's anger at their mother erupted in painful ways. But there was also healing happening, slowly, carefully, one interaction at a time. Rebecca had to earn their trust with consistency, with patience, with 1,000 small choices that prioritized their well-being over her comfort. Mr. Morrison served 3 years of his 5-year sentence before being released on parole. The restraining order held firm, and he was prohibited from any contact with his family. Rebecca told me later that she had nightmares about him finding them, about the games starting again. But the children seemed less concerned. They had internalized their safety in a way she was still learning. The case changed how I practiced dentistry. I became known in our area as someone who understood trauma, and social workers began referring foster children with complex histories to our clinic. We created a program specifically for children who had experienced abuse, with longer appointments, specific comfort measures, and a team trained in trauma responses. Some days were harder than others. A child would flinch at a certain movement or freeze at a particular sound, and I would be transported back to that morning with Emma. But more often, I saw resilience that took my breath away. Children who had endured unimaginable trauma learning to trust, to heal, to reclaim their right to be carefree. 5 years after that initial appointment, I received a graduation announcement. Emma Morrison, now Emma Chen, after choosing to take her foster mother's last name when she was adopted, was graduating from high school. She had included a handwritten note thanking me for listening when she talked about the games, for seeing what others had missed, for starting the process that saved her life. She was headed to college to study social work, she wrote, because she wanted to help other children the way Sarah Chen had helped her. She wanted to be the person who recognized the games, who understood the rules, who knew that sometimes saving a child meant destroying the only world they had ever known in order to give them a better one. Bython, she mentioned, was 15 now and had made the varsity basketball team. He was loud and confident and had a girlfriend who made him laugh. He didn't remember much about the games anymore, which she said was a blessing. He knew their history but wasn't defined by it, which felt like the best possible outcome. Rebecca had remarried to a man who understood her past and supported her continued healing. She worked as an overnight manager at the grocery store now, had bought a small house, and had rebuilt a relationship with her children that, while forever marked by the past, was genuine and loving. She sent photos sometimes of normal family dinners where no one had to be still, where voices raised in laughter instead of fear. The statue game had ended that morning in my dental chair, but its echoes continued to reverberate through all our lives. Emma's bravery in speaking her truth, even when she didn't know she was being brave, had created a cascade of changes that touched dozens of lives. My clinic became a safer place for vulnerable children. Other mandated reporters became more vigilant. A family was torn apart and rebuilt stronger. I think about trust often, about how Emma trusted me enough to share her family's secrets, even though she had been taught that secrets were sacred. That trust was a gift I didn't take lightly then and still don't now. Every child who sits in my chair carries their own story, their own possible secrets, their own games they might be forced to play. We installed a small plaque in our waiting room, low enough that children could read it easily. It says, "You are safe here." It's a simple message, but one that we work every day to make true, because somewhere out there, another child might be counting to 10,000 in the dark. might be holding their breath until a car passes, might be learning that love comes with conditions and rules and punishments. The games that families play shape us in ways we don't always recognize until much later. For Emma and Ethan, the games they were forced to play nearly destroyed them, but with intervention, with support, with adults who recognize that children shouldn't have to be statues to earn love, they learned new games. Games where everyone wins, where laughter is encouraged, where moving freely is not just allowed, but celebrated. Looking back, I'm struck by how a routine dental appointment became a turning point for so many lives. It reminds me that we never know when we might be the person positioned to make a difference, to see what others miss, to ask the question that opens the door to truth. Emma taught me that children will tell us what's happening if we create the space to listen, if we pay attention to the words they use and the games they think are normal. The statue game ended that day, but the ripples of change it created continue to spread. Every time I help train a new mandated reporter, every time our clinic's protocols help identify a child in need, every time Emma's story helps someone else recognize abuse disguised as a game, those ripples expand. It's a reminder that ending cycles of abuse isn't just about punishment or separation. It's about creating new possibilities, new games where everyone truly can win. In my quiet moments, I sometimes think about all the children who are still playing their family's dangerous games, still counting in dark places, still learning to be statues to survive. I can't save them all, but Emma taught me that saving even one, listening to even one small voice describing the unthinkable as normal, can change everything. And so I keep listening, keep watching, keep creating spaces where children feel safe enough to tell the truth about the games they're forced to play. The morning that started like any other became a defining moment not just for Emma and her family, but for everyone it touched. It's a heavy responsibility, being the person who recognizes when a game has gone too far, but it's also a profound privilege, because sometimes if we're paying attention, if we're willing to act, we get to be the person who helps end the game and start the healing. And that possibility makes every ordinary morning carry the potential for extraordinary change.